Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today I want to share with you one pattern that I've used in 5 very different ways. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today we're going to talk about the same pattern. The first version of the pattern that I made is this scrappy version. It came from a book called Nickel Quilts by Pat Speth, and I worked with a friend to exchange fabrics so that we could each have very scrappy versions of this really charming pattern. It uses sashings and cornerstones, but then adds little pieces to the sashing strips in order to create stars in the intersection between each of the fabrics. It was a great scrappy project. We used it a lot in a room that was very sunny, so that's why some of the fabrics look a little bit faded now. But it was my first use of this pattern, and it was easy to make, and it turned out really well. So the next time I used this pattern was to make this Simpsons quilt for Jason. I had the Simpsons fabric, and I really wanted a way to show off the fabric itself. I didn't want to cut it into tiny little pieces because I thought the impact of all of those characters from the television show would be lost if the pieces were cut really small. So I used this pattern again, but this time, instead of making the borders and the sashing strips scrappy, I used a standard common color to tie the whole thing together. And then the stars made out of the yellow to really add some punch and pop to the quilt. It's the exact same pattern as the first quilt, but I think it has a completely different look to it. The next time I decided to use this pattern was to make the travel quilt for Jason. Again, I was looking for a way to create some big squares on the quilt, but still add some interest into the overall patchwork. And this pattern seemed like the right choice. It was easy to scale up, so I made the white blocks where I attached the patches. I made those larger in this particular version of the quilt, but the inspiration was the same. It still has the sashing and the stars, but it was a great foundation to make the travel quilt. The fourth version of this quilt is a Star Wars quilt. My brother is a huge Star Wars fan, and he had purchased some fabric with my mom and asked us if we could make a quilt that featured the Star Wars fabric. And again, I was looking for a pattern that would enable us to feature that fabric without cutting it up too small. And in this case, we made the stars black because I was thinking stars, Star Wars seemed like a logical choice. What surprised me about this was the way that the black stars didn't really turn out like stars, and they make almost like a lattice work across the back. Sorry, they make a bit of a lattice work that looks like it flows behind the fabrics. I really liked the effect. I think the stars are actually kind of lost, but the impact almost seems like a web, like an electronic web of black lattice work behind the fabrics, and it just makes them pop right off the quilt. I thought it was really impactful and looked fantastic. And the fifth version of the quilt is this sports themed quilt. I have a number of sports fans in my life and collected a number of fabrics, all with a sporting theme to them. And so this this quilt takes advantage of the black and white that is sort of an allusion to what many referees in many sports wear, with then the sports fabric as the focal point in those big squares. This is yet a different size block. I've gone from 4.5-inch squares to 6.5-inch squares to 5-inch squares. And the pattern is really versatile and easy to resize depending on how big I want my feature fabric to be. The sports quilt still needs to be quilted, but I think it will make a great gift to the sports fans in my life. Do you have a pattern that you've made over and over again? A pattern that you keep going back to because it serves many different purposes? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to explore some of those fabulous patterns that people use. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make the very most of your fabric bits and pieces.